there's always Shane.
Guys.
Hey! You know, do you have to dress like that all the time?
Like what?
Well, I wouldn't be seen on the street with you. I
Yeah?
mean, every single thing about the way you're dressed, like, screams diet.
What does it mean to dress like a lesbian? What have lesbians worn historically, and why did they wear those things? In both queer history and women's history, lesbians are treated as an add-on, like a less important subsect to queer men or straight women. Lesbians in the field of fashion history is no exception. Despite lesbians having their own unique culture and styles of dress, lesbian fashion is a topic that has been largely ignored until recent years. Clothing is an irrevocable part of any culture, being tied to an individual's safety, visibility, and identity. The way someone dresses can say so much about them due to cultural associations with certain garments or styles of clothing. It can announce someone's identity or keep it hidden. As a lesbian who adores fashion more than anything in the world, intersecting these two parts of myself and learning about the history of my community is something that is so important to me, and I hope you'll come along on my journey. Before we get started, a couple of notes. At many points in this video, I will use the term lesbian as sort of an umbrella term. A lot of the figures I talk about might not have identified with the term for themselves, but they are still relevant in our history. I'll be using it to refer to a community that also includes bisexual and other queer women. This isn't to erase anyone's identity or to neglect the importance of the term lesbian referring to non-men who are exclusively attracted to non-men. As a lesbian, I just feel like it's the most accurate and relevant term for the community as a whole in this specific context. Speaking of context, there is a lot. I apologize for any points that might feel off topic, but what we wear is so entwined with why we wear it, so I may have gone on several tangents and told people's entire life stories. I've put in this video only what I feel is relevant. Lesbians have had to face homophobia and misogyny intersectionally. Because of this, there's been so much erasure and lack of visibility, but that does not stop us from existing. Most of history, lesbians have not been able to be as open as some are today. So many lesbians lived or live in a society where they have to hide, entering loveless marriages and acting as a subservient wife and mother. This did not mean that they didn't find other ways to embrace their identity in private, though. A lot of examples of lesbian fashion aren't complete styles and aesthetics, but small details and accessories. This is often referred to as flagging, a way you can let other women know you're like them while also keeping yourself under the radar. I've combined these flags with other motifs and symbols that are historically significant to lesbians, which can sometimes be used as flags or as overt symbols of pride and political wear. I'm sure most people who are in any way associated with the queer community are at least familiar with Sappho's name, but if you aren't, Sappho was a poet in ancient Greece. She lived on the island of Lesbos, and her poems were so highly regarded that she was referred to by Plato as the 10th Muse. She famously wrote about her romantic feelings for other women, so much so that her very name became synonymous with women who love women. We get the word Sapphic from her name, of course, as well as lesbian being derived from Lesbos. Side note, the residents of the island of Lesbos, who are also referred to as lesbians, took it to court in 2008 to ban the use of the word lesbian in reference to anyone but a native to their island. It was dismissed. Sappho's work and her love of women has faced quite a bit of censorship and destruction. It is believed that Pope Gregory VII ordered a burning of her work in Rome and Constantinople, but it could have been a number of people at fault for the loss of her work. Today, only one full poem survives, Ode to Aphrodite, with the rest of her poetry existing in fragments, supposedly adding up to only 7% of her life's work. Romantic life was also erased and denied throughout history. Straight relationships were invented for her centuries after her death, a weird straight-washed historical fanfiction shipping her with men who she likely barely knew or didn't even exist. While we don't 100% know what Sappho's life was like, these pairings are far more of a stretch than the gay interpretations that certain academics deny and abhor. The reason I've placed Sappho in this section as opposed to the historical icon section is because, similarly to the uncertainty of her life, we really don't know what Sappho wore. She was not depicted in art until long after her death, so all we have to go off are assumptions based on the time period. Still, the associations we have with her became a huge symbol for lesbians. Crowns of flowers and foliage and flowing tunics worn to dance, sing, create, and of course show affection and intimacy with other women. Her existence in itself is important for lesbians because it shows that there have always been women who felt this way, and that is a beautiful thing that should be celebrated. In the early 20th century, Sappho's work and name re-emerged when Paris became a hot spot for queer women. The community there became known as Paris Lesbos, and lesbian writer Natalie Clifford Barney used her inheritance money to rent a piece of land on which lesbians could live and congregate together. They recreated ancient Greek aesthetics and ritual, and it was a safe space for women to express their love and desire for each other while creating art. They wore ancient Greek-style attire and headpieces, as I'll picture on screen in one of their dances. According to Diana Sohomi in her book No Modernism Without Lesbians, Barney sketched her rules for sapphic love. Women were to relinquish ties to their family, husbands, children, and country, and instead write, dance, compose, and act on their love for each other. Personally, I would have loved to join in on this lesbian cult, but unfortunately she was evicted from the property. She did, however, continue this idea of a sapphic celebration with her weekly salon that she held for 2 decades. The aesthetic and symbol of Sappho continued with a participant in the 1978 Equal Rights Amendment March in Washington, D.C., dressing up as Sappho to march with the Lesbian Nation group. Sappho's legacy lives on today. These sapphic aesthetics are still very associated with queer women, and this might just be my interpretation, but they feel very reminiscent of the cottagecore aesthetic that has been so popular with lesbians online in recent years. As Eleanor Medhurst puts it in her book Unsuitable, Sappho founded the global lesbian nation, even if only because it would not be lesbian without her. Just like her name, the clothing associated with Sappho is shorthand for an entire culture. While her poetry is culturally phenomenal, it's even bigger than that. In middle school, I remember captioning my Instagram posts with random Sappho fragments I found in my book of translations, not really knowing what the poems actually meant, but just wanting to be a part of the celebration and tradition of women loving women, and that being a beautiful thing. I had a hard time placing Sappho into this essay due to the fact that we don't really know what she wore, but she is so vital for lesbian history that it didn't feel right to omit her. In addition to herself as a symbol for sapphic love, she also originated one of the biggest pieces of lesbian fashion culture, the color purple. In the 94th fragment of Sappho's work, she describes parting with a female lover and reminds her of beautiful times we had. For many crowns of violets and roses at my side you put on. In fragment 21, she describes the one with violets in her lap, a phrase she repeats in fragment 30 and 103. In fragment 92, she mentions purple robe, cloaks, crowns, beautiful. Purple flowers like violets, purple crocuses, and hyacinths, as well as adornments in their respective color, were a frequent motif in Sappho's work. The lesbian association with violets continued throughout the centuries. During the Sapphic Renaissance of Paris Lesbos, women took violets as a representation of lesbian love. Many of them would pin a violet to their lapel or use them as motif in their own poetry or art. In 1926, the French play La Prisonnière, I don't know if I'm saying that right, was opened in Paris, and in New York a few months later as The Captive. Written by Edouard Bourdet, it follows the story of a secret lesbian affair with the characters exchanging violets throughout the play. The play was attended by many lesbians and gay men excited to see their community and identities represented on the stage, and it became popular for audience members to adorn themselves with violets pinned to their collars or belts. With this culmination of lesbian associations with violets, the flower was mostly solidified as a gay thing. Violet farmers were dismayed at the fact that lesbians were their main customers at the time, and the flower, as well as the color purple, were avoided by mainstream fashion for years. Modern lesbians nod to this signaling with enamel pins in the shape of violets, violet prints on fabric, or even violet tattoos. The Sapphic flag, a more inclusive symbol for the entire women-loving women community, includes a violet as the central motif. This continuation of symbolic traditions from ancient times is, in the words of Medhurst, like a chain of violets, twisted together by the hands of lesbians generations apart, that reaches across thousands of years. Violet was not the only shade associated with lesbianism. Throughout the 20th century, lavender was a euphemism for queerness in both women and men. Possessing a lavender streak meant being a little gay, a phrase coined in the biography of Abraham Lincoln. In the 1940s, a political purge of homosexuals from the federal workplace began and was dubbed the Lavender Scare. During the second wave of feminism, lesbians were ostracized by straight feminist activists, including Betty Friedan, author of The Feminine Mystique. She believed that lesbians were a hindrance to the feminist movement, calling them a lavender menace. She meant it as an insult, but in that case, I don't think she should have made it sound so cool. A group of lesbian activists, which included Barbara Love, Rita Mae Brown, and many other prominent lesbian feminists of the time, organized to create the Lavender Menace group as a direct response to Friedan's words. They kicked off during the Second Congress to Unite Women. During the opening ceremony, members shut off the lights and sound as they ran up and down the aisles, culminating in a shout of Lavender Menace and throwing lavender scent bombs onto the stage. In her memoir, Tales of the Lavender Menace, member Carla J. described the event and the crowd's reaction. When Michaela Griffo and Jessie Fallstein flipped the lights back on, both aisles were lined with 17 lesbians wearing their Lavender Menace t-shirts and holding the placards we had made. Some invited the audience to join them. I stood up and yelled, "Yes, yes, sisters, I'm tired of being in the closet because of the women's movement." Much to the horror of the audience, I unbuttoned the long-sleeved red blouse I was wearing and ripped it off. Underneath, I was wearing a Lavender Menace t-shirt. There were hoots of laughter as I joined the others in the aisles. Then Rita yelled to the members of the audience, "Who wants to join us?" Then Rita also pulled off her Lavender Menace t-shirt. Again, there were gasps, but underneath she had on another one. More laughter. The audience was on our side. Some women left, and the convention organizers attempted to restore the original session, but it was too late for that. The delegates were engaged with the lesbians, and they spoke for 2 hours, inviting delegates to answer questions about lesbianism. And many straight women thanked them for helping them to confront their feelings about lesbians. Black and working class women felt particularly engaged as they had also been feeling excluded from the women's movement. The rest of the conference sessions were abandoned and instead became a series of workshops on lesbianism. In 2010, Katherine Hudson and Scott Williams founded Wear It Purple Day to show support for the queer community. It was originally started in Australia in response to global stories of real teenagers, real heartache, and their very real responses. And thanks to the internet, it has grown into an international celebration of queer pride and community. It is celebrated on the 4th Friday of August every year. You can celebrate next year by simply wearing purple on that day. All of this is to say that LGBT, and specifically lesbian history, is steeped in purple, and today Sapphic women still wears the color as a symbol of visibility. If you are aware of pride flags, you might be familiar with some of the popular contenders for the lesbian flag. One popular option, designed in 1999, was the Labrys flag, which consists of a solid violet-colored background with a Labrys symbol over a black triangle. All the elements of this flag are powerful symbols of lesbian revolution. The Labrys, a double-headed axe, was used as a symbol of empowerment by lesbian feminists in the 1970s, with the black triangle having its roots in the Holocaust, similar to the history of the pink triangle. This flag generally fell out of use, possibly because it doesn't fit the same look as other pride flags, and possibly because of its powerful yet controversial symbolism. Many lesbian flags have flitted around the internet, but the one that the community seems to have landed on, which I have hanging on my wall, was created in 2018 by Emily Gwen. It features red, orange, white, pink, and purple shades of stripe. From top to bottom, the meanings of each stripe are gender nonconformity, independence, community, unique relationships to womanhood, serenity and peace, love and sex, and femininity. There's also a 5-stripe version that seems to combine some of the colors, though the official meanings for the stripes are unclear. This flag is actually a rendition of the much controversial lipstick lesbian flag, which is a whole other story. Lesbian flag discourse is such a convoluted topic which does not seem super relevant for this. The central need for a flag is very real though. Lesbians are so often grouped together with gay men, and while our histories are very tied, lesbians need their own thing sometimes too. Since the popularization of Gwen's flag, pink and orange together have signified lesbians, which can create for some accidental lesbian decor, like this year's Michael's Halloween collection. Many lesbians embrace the flag by hanging it, wearing it as a pin, or printed on clothing. I have this turtleneck that I got specifically because it looks like the lesbian flag. While it's a more modern example, it's gained traction so quickly and is easily recognizable. Or if someone doesn't recognize it, it's a great opportunity to spread knowledge and visibility. Not as a part of my research for this project, but just reading something relaxing for fun, I picked up the book Make My Wish Come True by Rachel Lippincott and Alison Derrick. In the very first chapter of this rom-com, which was published this year, the main character describes getting ready for school, putting on enough rings to let people know she likes women. Literally textbook lesbian flagging. I was so excited to read that line because it aligns so well with this section. While rings can be a symbol of purity, commitment, or daintiness in the mainstream, they've lived a very different life in lesbian culture. Starting with the pinky finger. In an interview with several lesbian elders conducted by Katrina Raleigh, 2 women described rings on the little finger as being a flag for lesbians. Eleanor, one of the women interviewed in Raleigh's research, described the culture of these rings. Narrated by me, here's a quick excerpt of this interview. So would you see the pinky ring as being a kind of symbol? Oh, definitely, yes. Has it always been one? Yes, it seems as though. Ray gave me that just after the war, and Beatty gave me that and my opal ring. So that was fairly butch jewelry, was it? A pinky ring? We didn't call it a pinky ring though. It was just I don't know, we always put it on our little finger. So did other women you know have them? Well, yes, we all had these rings. The thumb is another place lesbians adorn themselves. The origin of the thumb ring being a lesbian signal is a little less clear, but it is widely recognized today. It's a little unconventional, similar to the pinky ring. As Daisy Jones puts it in her article for The Vice, as a piece of jewelry, it sits neither at the traditionally feminine nor masculine end of the spectrum. It is casual yet delicate, vaguely practical and faintly erotic. By wearing a thumb ring, you're saying, I like my hands to look pretty, yes, but I also know how to use them. Someone who wears a thumb ring can probably fix a lawnmower or construct a bed, but they'll also read poetry and look after their plants properly. What could be more lesbian than that? Though lesbians definitely accessorize the other fingers too. Lesbians in a commanded relationship or a legal marriage in a time and place that accepts that might choose to wear engagement or wedding rings on the ring fingers. Further, I might argue that it's not just where you wear the rings, but the abundance of them. Going so overkill with things that are seen as traditionally feminine and dainty that they become a little impractical and gaudy in the best way is one of the most lesbian things I can imagine. In Brazil, it's very popular to wear a coconut ring to flag your sexuality to other lesbians. These rings are not actually made of coconut, but of shells from the tucum fruit, which resemble coconuts. They were first made and worn by enslaved people in the 19th century as a sign of rebellion, and the tradition was passed down through generations of all types of marginalized people until it eventually evolved into the culturally significant piece of lesbian fashion they are today. Brazilian lesbians interviewed by Medhurst emphasized that every lesbian has one. Some couples even wear them as wedding rings or propose to each other with them. Like pinky and thumb rings, the tradition is passed down by observation and word of mouth. A ring is a very subtle accessory, and that's what makes its signaling so effective. A ring is generally considered a feminine thing, so it'll go unnoticed by the general public who don't realize the difference in the way lesbians and straight women wear them. But if you know what exactly to look for in a woman's hand, it can act as a beacon. Subtle enough that you can wear it while still being closeted, but apparent enough to find community and safe spaces, or a girlfriend. Last year, my college put on a production of Fun Home, which is my second favorite musical of all time after Falsettos. During the song Ring of Keys, the audience was laughing. I was so shocked and a little horrified. Like, guys, does this song not bring you to tears? It certainly does for me. Some of the people were probably queer, laughing in a that's so true way, but it reminded me that lesbians are seen as a joke for so many people. And these signals are so important to our community, are thought of as meaningless stereotypes, even in the abundantly LGBT community I'm in. Anyway, if you aren't familiar with this song, I really urge you to listen, but I'll provide context and a few of my favorite lines. It's from the perspective of young lesbian Alison Bechtel meeting a butch delivery woman and recognizing herself in her. This stanza is adult Alison reflecting on the memory. You didn't notice her at first, but I saw her the moment she walked in. She was a delivery woman. She came in with a hand cart full of packages. She was an old school butch. And from the perspective of young Allison, I thought it was supposed to be wrong, but you seem okay with being strong. It's probably conceited to say, but I think we're alike in a certain way. Do you feel my heart saying hi? In this whole luncheonette, why am I the only one who sees you're beautiful? No, I mean handsome. Your swagger and your bearing, and the just right clothes you're wearing. Your short hair and your dungarees, and your lace-up boots. And your keys. Your ring of keys. I know you. It's such a good song. Clearly, the Ring of Keys is almost an innate symbol of lesbianism, and in most cases, butchness, which I'll talk a little more about later. This seems to have its roots in butches who worked blue-collar jobs, whether because they felt safer or more identity-aligned in traditionally masculine jobs, or because they were discriminated against in more traditionally feminine jobs. Working jobs like delivery meant that they could dress in a butch style, not being constricted by dress codes like at a waitressing job, for instance. And at many of these jobs, they also needed to carry key rings. The abundance of lesbians wearing them for that reason caught on, and so Sapphic women started to wear them even without working a job that needed them. More specifically, carabiners caught on as a practical, subtle sign. Lesbians also wore them to signify their sexual preferences based on which side they were hooked onto. In an interview with Christina Catarucci, Alison Bechdel said, "When I first came out, the key ring was the first visual cue I learned of my new world, picked up through anthropological surveys of lesbian dance parties. Many years and worn-out carabiners and photos of friends' key-adorned hips later, I still wear my key on my belt for function and fashion." Carabiners are another word-of-mouth flag and are still worn today as a piece of lesbian pride. By no means has this been a comprehensive list of every lesbian motif or accessory ever, but just some that stood out to me. These little signs and whispers are a way to find connection while maintaining safety, or, if you're out of the closet, to show support and pride and purposely look gayer. Even though most of these flags aren't super secret anymore due to the internet and the wider acceptance of LGBT identities, there's still a way to connect to our history of the past and community of the present. For this next section, I wanted to touch on a few historical icons who serve some old-time lesbian realness. Just kidding, but these are a few women whose style of dress and lifetime relationships contributed to their being widely interpreted as lesbians. If they had lived in 2024, who knows what they might have actually identified themselves as. Maybe bisexual, possibly even transmasculine or gender nonconforming. The point of this section is not to put a label on them, but instead to acknowledge their influence and examine the way their fashion shaped others' perceptions of them. Medhurst's words on the subject in her writings about Anne Lister sum up the sentiment pretty well. Though she never called herself a lesbian, lesbianism remains integral to her story because stories are read by their readers. Their existence shows that queerness, and more specifically lesbianism, is not a new thing, nor is the fact that it shapes one style of dress. Anne Lister is possibly the most culturally iconic example of historic lesbians, inspiring the 2019 drama Gentleman Jack. Her life is also one of the most well documented. She kept diaries throughout her life, totaling 5 million words, encrypted in her secret code that would not be found and cracked until after her death. She was the sole heiress to her family's estate, and so lived a comfortable life as a landowner and entrepreneur. Living during Regency-era Britain, her economic comfortability is a big reason why she was able to present herself so unconventionally. She had several important female lovers. One was Mariana Lawton, who she spent 21 years on and off with before she married a man, likely for stability in life, as she was not of the social standing Lister was. Another was Anne Walker, who she married in 1834 and traveled with until her death in 1840. In a diary entry of hers, Anne writes that she loves and only loves the fair sex, and thus beloved by them in return. Her heart revolts from any other love than theirs. In addition to her clear love for women, Anne Lister is famous for her androgynous style of dress. As a woman of high social standing, feminine garments were not absent in her wardrobe, but she must prefer to dress in men's clothing. At one point in her life, notably right after Mariana's marriage, she made it a point to only wear black, purging her closet of color and giving away much of her wardrobe to female friends and family. This was significant because in the later portion of the Regency era, when this was taking place, rainbow fashion was very in for ladies, while gentlemen were wearing no color at all. Today, wearing all black as a woman is very common, but at the time it was a direct contradiction to what was expected of her. This was a conscious choice as well, though she did not specify her reasons for it. In one diary she wrote, Went in black silk, the first time to an evening visit. I've entered upon my plan of always wearing black. Occasionally in her diaries, Anne will describe her outfits and the reactions they elicited from others. One instance she describes as having a leather strap attached to her umbrella, a masculine accessory at the time, and a female companion of hers asking her to remove it before they were seen in public together. That same companion, though, complimented Anne's style and cadence on another occasion. "We were talking of my dress," writes Anne about Mrs. Kelly. "She said people thought I should look better in a bonnet. She contended I should not, and said my whole style of dress suited me and my manners and was consistent and becoming to me." While Anne certainly dressed for her own preference and comfortability, she also seemed to want to impress other women and enjoyed when other women dressed up for meetings with her. Anne's whole existence resisted gender binaries, occupying roles in life that were reserved for men at the time. She was a landowner to an estate and 2 coal mines, lover to women, and brave dresser of gentlemen's fashion. Mademoiselle de Rocart was a Parisian actress who made her stage debut in 1772. As soon as she hit the stage at the age of 16, she was regarded as extremely beautiful and talented, with both male and female admirers in the audience. Many actresses at this time would entertain romance with male fans, de Rocart was not known to. This first earned her a respectably pure reputation, though that quickly gave way when her personal life began to be publicized. She had some male lovers in her time, but clearly preferred the company of other women. Multiple of her affairs were documented in gossip column-style publications, including one with opera singer Sophie Arnold. A characteristic of her performances and even her off-stage dress that gave her a controversial fame was her cross-dressing. She was often depicted in publications in gentleman's wear and described to have been disguised as a man after having attempted to fulfill that role with her loving mistress. She even wrote a role for herself in her play Henriette, in which her character, a woman, disguised herself as a male soldier in order to go after the women she was in love with. She led a very tumultuous life, at one point being imprisoned for 6 months before being pardoned by Napoleon, who was a fan. She actually met her final romantic partner, whom she remained until death in prison. She was nicknamed the Priestess of Lesbos and rumored to be a member of a secret lesbian society that may or may not have been real. Her cross-dressing and public love of women was simultaneously what gave her such passionate fans and what caused her career to fall. The controversy surrounding her continued up until her funeral, when fans rioted the church because the clergy was refusing to bury her. Julie d'Aubigny was a French swordswoman and opera singer who led a very wild and chaotic life. Her father was a secretary to a member of the king's court. She had no other siblings, so her father educated her in fencing and sent her to school, which was rare for girls at the time. She had an affair with the count who her father was a secretary to when she was 14 and then got married soon after that. So she did have romances with men, but these early ones feel quite predatory to me. The marriage did not last because of her temperament. She ended up running away with a fencing master, and they made a living by fighting as performance. During these fights, she would dress in men's clothing, but she wasn't really trying to disguise herself. She was once accused of being a man because she was just too good at fencing, but she revealed her chest to prove that she was a woman, sort of like Amanda Bynes in She's the Man is what I'm imagining. After some time of fencing for a living, she started a career as an opera singer. A female fan of hers became a very intense but short-lived relationship. After they fell in love, the girl's family sent her off to live in a convent, while Julie followed in disguise to join her. She then hatched an escape plan by faking her girlfriend's death. They stole the body of a recently deceased nun from the convent, placed her in the girl's bed, and set the room on fire before fleeing. They were on the lam for a few months, Julie being wanted for the crime, but the girl ended up returning to her family. Julie continued to travel, performing in the opera and participating in duels, often cross-dressing in men's clothing. She had countless romances with both men and women, and too many adventures to recount here. She was generally a very intense person, which is why most of her relationships didn't last too long, but her charms always attracted new lovers. She died at the age of 33 while in a convent for real this time. Julie's dress was unique in that she wasn't really trying to masquerade as a man, she was just being herself, though some onlookers perceived her as such, especially when they would see her fight. In her article about Julie's life, author Kelly Gardner said, "Through many heroic and sometimes pathetic adventures, the crowds adored her. In spite of her high-profile affairs with women, her brawling and dueling, her breeches and swords, and even her contralto." The most recorded, highly accepted historical lesbians are usually those who dress in a masculine or at least an androgynous way. There's a number of reasons why this could be. My thought is that more feminine lesbians are just less obviously lesbian to historians. Women who write love letters to each other are easier to mark as just best friends when neither of them look how you'd expect a lesbian to look. It's also important to note that the women in this section are overwhelmingly high class. Unfortunately, those were the only women that had the freedom to express their differences through dress without quite literally risking their lives. Working class lesbians still existed, with some of them forced into patriarchal roles of womanhood, or some disguising them as men for their entire lifetime to avoid this and be with the women they loved. These historical lesbian fashion icons are really examples for the fact that women who love other women have always been here, gender non-conforming people have always been here, and if they are given the privilege to do so safely, they will express these truths about themselves via fashion. The renaissance of gay culture was born during the period of the First and Second World Wars. Increased discrimination, as well as changed environments and gender roles, contributed to many young queer people discovering their identities and finding community. When the Second World War ended, there was a push to return to traditional family values, which was a stark and hard change for the community. After the Second World War, popular and expert literature became increasingly obsessed with lesbians' gender deviance as anxieties mounted about women's wartime emancipation and perceived masculinization, writes Alex Genter in an article for Feminist Studies. This is the time when gay and lesbian bars really came to the forefront of gay culture, a space for people to be themselves behind closed doors. In these bars, some of the most famous and well-known terminology was coined: the identities of butch and femme. These terms are hard to pin down due to their nature as descriptors of gender expression. They can mean so many different things to different people. At the time, when language was limited, butch actually referred to any person assigned female at birth who dressed and behaved in a masculine way. As the years went on and the language and culture developed, the distinction between butch or masculine lesbians and trans men became more clear, with butch becoming synonymous with a lesbian who dresses masculinely. Oftentimes, these people also played more of a dominant role in relationships, but that is certainly not the rule. Femme comes from the French word for woman and usually describes a lesbian who dresses or behaves in a traditionally feminine manner. These women often played the more submissive role in a relationship, but not always. While butch-femme pairings were very common, it's not as if femme lesbians and butch lesbians didn't date each other. One way that the law encroached on butch lesbians' expression was the three-piece clothing law, which is exactly what it sounds like. You had to have at least 3 female pieces of clothing, which is obviously very subjective and strange. Presenting yourself as butch in public was dangerous. You put yourself at risk of being arrested, harassed, or kept from a job. Because of this, some women found butchness in traditionally feminine clothes. For example, wearing well-tailored skirts instead of flowy dresses. This way, they were still wearing quote-unquote female clothing, but in a way that made them more comfortable. For some, presenting as butch was worth the danger, embracing the style as a radical act of self-expression. Femmes, on the other hand, are much less obviously gay to the straight onlooker. Because femme fashion can look so similar to that of straight women, it's either ignored or fetishized. Femmes have historically faced a lot of criticism from inside the community, being seen as heteronormative and a hindrance to lesbian feminism. But the truth is that the way that femme lesbians wear feminine clothing, and sometimes the specific clothes that they choose to wear, is so different from straight women and can even be radical in its own right. Evolution of femme as an identity has gone from the idea of a binary, from being the opposite of butch, to being an identity in itself. Now it's a very solid identity, not just about someone who may or may not be attracted to butches, as Wendy Colley says in an interview with Evan Arkhart. For some femme lesbians, their style is about turning up the girly notch so much that it's not attractive to the male gaze anymore. Carolyn Narby wrote in an article titled "On My Butchness" that butch is a trickster gender, and so, in a similar way, is femme. Lesbian gender expressions do not emulate heteropatriarchy, they subvert it. Femme removes femininity from the discursive shadow of masculinity and thereby strips it from any connotation of subordination or inferiority. Butch takes markers of masculinity and divests them in their association with maleness or manhood. Butchness works against the gender binary, the masculine-feminine paradigm, and reclaims for women the full breadth of possibilities when it comes to gender expression. There are so many intricacies and details just within the butch and femme labels that they could have been an entire research project on their own, and there is so much I wasn't able to touch on in this section. Also, each individual lesbian's relationship to the femininity and or masculinity of their clothing is so personal that it's impossible to pinpoint just one idea of what a femme or butch looks like. While a lot of lesbians choose to forego these labels altogether, even in the height of their terms, many lesbians did not use or identify with either. These labels are a part of our history that a lot of people still choose to partake in. I've seen an uptick in the last few years of women using these identities, as I think we are returning to look at the history of our community and the women who came before us. Lesbian bars and real-life safe spaces have been on a decline since the 1980s, when there were about a total of 200 lesbian bars throughout the United States, to 2021 when there were only 15. There's clearly been a need for their return because as of 2024 there are more than 30. With the internet, there probably won't ever be a complete return to the culture of gay and lesbian spaces in the mid-century, but online spaces have made way for new developments in lesbian fashion. During the pandemic, there was a phenomenon of lesbian earrings, which are chunky, eccentric earrings handmade out of objects like calico critters, rubber ducks, and other things you wouldn't expect to be put on earrings, which were popular with femme lesbians and became a form of queer flagging. Butch fashion has also had a resurgence recently, though a lot of lesbians I've seen prefer to use the term mask. The reason for this could be because of the associations with the word butch being stereotypical, or possibly because the history of that word is too deep. Or maybe mask feels more inclusive to more forms and levels of masculinity, or it's just the natural progression of language and labels. Nonetheless, all edges of the lesbian fashion spectrum are being explored, with hyper-specific labels like Lulu Lesbian, which is exactly as it sounds, a lesbian who wears a lot of Lululemon and activewear, making their way into the lexicon. The rise of lesbian styles unfortunately also gives way to their commodification. In 1993, New York Magazine first used the term lesbian chic. To put it concisely, this was a form of lesbian style that was made palatable as a trend for straight women to participate in, so they could feel edgy or cool without having to face any of the prejudice of actually liking women. This trickle-up fashion is common with marginalized groups having their unique styles and pieces imposed upon by oppressive groups. This year specifically, I've seen a lot of lesbians on social media rediscover carabiners as a lesbian accessory, which then led to them trending in the mainstream, being sold at stores like Urban Outfitters, and worn by unknowing straight girls. Not only is this just annoying and ignorant, but it takes away the whole point of flagging because you can't tell who's gay anymore. While recent times have been rough on the queer community, we do live in a far more accepting time than most of our predecessors, and we have so many lesbian fashion icons on the map right now. Chappell Roan is a great example of a lesbian embracing hyper-femme style. Actress Iowa Debery really encapsulates the idea of merging butch and femme styles into one, and her movie Bottoms illustrates several lesbian and sapphic characters, each with a unique yet recognizably queer style. For my last little segment, I wanted to do a little rapid fire round of some of the misconceptions about lesbian fashion that I've seen. These are unintentionally almost all term related because pretty much all of the cliches surrounding lesbian style are true in some way. Number 1. High femme means hyper femme and stone butch means hyper mask. This is not what this means. I've seen so many people use these words, especially high femme, to describe their styles. And that is part of it, but it also refers to certain roles in sexual relationships. It's understandable why people make that mistake, but I think it's super important to make this clear because I've seen underage people using these terms, which is not good at all, and also straight girls using high femme, which is a little bit funny, but also perpetuates the myth. Number 2, the spelling F-E-M is an incorrect spelling of femme or a completely different term. They mean the same thing and both are correct. The reason the two spellings emerged is actually because working class lesbians would usually spell it F-E-M because the French spelling was not obvious to them and they sound the same when spoken. I've seen F-E-M being used today as a more inclusive version of femme, encompassing non-lesbians who dress feminine, which is just another example of the evolution of language. Historically though, they are the same term, just different spellings. Number 3, stud is the same as butch. These terms are actually different. Stud in this context is coined by and exclusive to Black lesbians. It was specifically coined to differentiate Black lesbians' experiences from their white counterparts and express gender roles developed within the Black community, as Chris Chesson defined it. Reaching the end of my research project, I returned to my original research question. What have lesbians historically worn, And why did they wear those things? And more broadly, what does it mean to dress like a lesbian? What have lesbians historically worn? Everything. But some of the most visible lesbians are known to have embraced masculinity or using significant accessories to flag themselves. Others have dressed in a traditionally feminine way that was expected of them as women. Why did they wear these things? As I've stated so many times, it depends on the person. But historically, these ways of dress have either existed to keep themselves safe, make themselves known, or both simultaneously. What does a lesbian look like? I think I've illustrated that there's no one way for a lesbian to look, but there are certain elements common in lesbian style. Let's go back to the outfit Shane McCutcheon is wearing that Dana Fairbanks described as screaming dyke from the clip of the L word I played at the beginning of this video. Honestly, this isn't a super gay look for Shane, but to dissect it, her hair is sort of short and shaggy, sort of a layered bob. Shane is a hairdresser in the show, so she probably would have done this look herself. She's wearing a lightly patterned white button-up shirt, which based on the buttons is actually a men's shirt, but it's pretty figure-fitting on her. She seems to have cut off the sleeves to create a fraying tank top silhouette. She also has a necklace made from black cord that seems to have some sort of rock hanging from it. So I guess if I absolutely had to sum up lesbian fashion, while the outfit is pretty casual and plain, she's mixed masculinity with femininity style has her own flair in it, and that I had this opportunity to dive into it so completely. Circumstance has suppressed lesbian expression so much throughout history, but that has never stopped us from existing and being visible in whatever form is safe. I hope you enjoyed learning about all these amazing women and what they wore with me.
God, Dana. Sorry, man.
Well, look, if I'm outed, I'm screwed, Alice, all right?